Hello and welcome to Week 18's Foot Weekly podcast episode. This is a gameplay episode a bit earlier in the week than we typically have it because there's going to be a content episode out once Team of the Year warm-up starts. We'll have Josh back on that one. It'll be a supporter episode. He can't make this one, but I do have a panel of gameplay experts, starting with a familiar voice, Richard Buckley. Hello.
Hello, thank you for the invite as always. It's great to chat gameplay on the Foot Weekly pod. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and we also have with us, also pretty familiar, top NA player 𝗍𝘗𝘁. Hello, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Good to have you. And returning to the podcast after quite some time, I'm very excited to have him back. The doctor himself, Dr. Nightwatch, aka Ivan, as we'll probably be calling him on the podcast. Hello.
Hello, thanks for having me. Used to be here as a player, now I'm here as a coach.
Yeah. And hopefully we'll get a bit of coaching as this podcast goes on. The first thing on the agenda is, unsurprisingly, the patch we had. It's been out for a bit, and that means we've all had a chance to play it and we can talk about it. And I think the main things that I wanted to run through, in fact, why don't I run through the sort of gameplay changes, then we can talk about them. So in certain situations, the positioning system was bringing players too close to the ball carrier when cutting off passing lanes, resulting in auto tackles. This could also result in midfielders being pulled out of position to overload the ball carrier. Addressed multiple situations where the goalkeeper would deflect the ball instead of catching it, making it look like they fumbled the save. Addressed an issue where skill moves could be unresponsive or not be triggered. Addressed an issue where the goalkeeper could sometimes fail to perform desperation animations when running back to the goal on chip shots. Addressed an issue where the player not receiving the ball from the ball kid could result in a broken throw-in animation, preventing the game from progressing. Addressed issues where attempting a lobbed through pass would sometimes result in a through ground pass instead. Players were incorrectly able to do precision lobs off headers, which could result in headers launching enormous distances across the field. Sometimes the goalkeeper would trigger an unrealistic jumping animation during a save. Addressed an issue where the precision pass UI would incorrectly enlarge after a pass was made. Addressed an issue where a super cancel sometimes did not stop the player running after the ball. Reduced accuracy of first time lobbed through passes. In rare situations, players could appear invisible on the pitch. Shadow striker, plus, you could perhaps say. So those are the changes. Let's start with you, Ivan, and you guys on the podcast. Is there anything particularly that stood out to you playing the game post this patch?
Well, I think the bugs that were addressed are fixed, as they say. Unfortunately, the main thing that is of concern, at least to us folks in competitive play, is the first time lofted through passes mentioned in the patch notes to be with reduced accuracy. Unfortunately, that's not how it feels in game. So we're patiently waiting for the next one, hoping that meta will kind of disappear.
Yeah, that's been frustrating. So do you think there has been a bit of a reduction and it's just not enough, or just like it didn't really do anything at all?
I'm not sure how obviously the calculations work in the background. Maybe the accuracy of the passes are in fact reduced and they're very inaccurate, but because of the nature of the pass, where you play the ball first time in empty space behind the defense to be through on goal, no matter how inaccurate they are, your player he's always accelerated compared to the defenders, and thus he can always adjust his run to where the ball's going to land. So no matter if it's perfectly in his path towards the goal or if he has to make a bit of a detour, it doesn't really matter. As he's accelerated, he'll get there first. And that lack of accuracy on the pass, as long as it's an empty space, it's accurate to do the job you want the pass to do. I actually think they're better than they were initially at the start of the year, because back then when you would do that pass, it would kind of land in your player's feet, or at least like close in front of him in his path. Whereas now it's that inaccurate that your player can actually accelerate and run into the ball. And as we know, with the ball, players run kind of slower this year right now. Whereas without the ball, their pace matters, as the stats show, which makes this type of pass even better. So it's just a mixture of things that make that pass really overpowered, I think.
I think what you sort of alluding to, is it that the defensive AI doesn't track the runner correctly rather than the actual pass being super strong?
I personally don't mind that tracking either, because even on 50 depth, they don't track it. On 30, I'm not sure if we've tested it enough. But the issue is that if you make the defenders track the attacker, they have to start tracking them maybe 5-10 yards before the attacker is like on the offside line, which would in turn be exploitable by just constantly sending players forward and just pushing the defense left, right, and center, which is also not an ideal scenario. I think just the main issue is when you play a driven pass to your striker, so the ball is first of all coming at rapid speed towards your player, which is already hard to play a first-time ball, at least in real life. And the second one is obviously the 180 degrees or anything above 90 degrees, which in my opinion should be kind of like a red time finish. Like it should be completely scuffed. They should hit the ground. The ball should like trickle down or like p-roll towards the defenders, whereas that's not the case. And from my understanding, I don't think that it's easy for the game to differentiate between a first-time through ball and a normal through ball. So that's why adding error to that is much more difficult than we might think it is. So that's why I think it's such a hard fix. But my issue is more offensively than defensively.
Is it on the play style as well?
I don't think so. No, because right after the patch, we played a ladder with one of my players, and a second minute in of one of the games, a striker with a 70 long ball and no play style just whipped out a perfect 180 and was in on goal. So it's play styles potentially do help, but I think if no play styles makes it more inaccurate and more in empty space, it actually makes it better. So it's one of those.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, it's a really good insight in terms of what the issue is there and why it might not be as simple as just nerfing the pass. And is there anything else there, Hugh, that you've noticed from the patch that's affecting gameplay at the moment?
Yeah, I think going to the first point from the gameplay notes about the kind of auto positioning system, I think that is something that could be a little frustrating, I think, on both sides of the ball, because, you know, when you're defending, you'd like to kind of have a sense of where your players are going to be. And if they kind of automatically move into certain areas, that can be a little confusing at times, because you kind of think, okay, a player's not being marked, so I need to move someone to mark him, and then suddenly someone else is moving already. But then when you do have the ball, sometimes it was also confusing because you can see who your opponent's controlling, and if they're not controlling a player and that player is suddenly moving to cover someone else, and it's not really in the same way as like the second man press or contain or anything like that. I think that's definitely something that had to be looked at. I can't say so far if I've completely noticed how much of a difference the patch has made, but I'm glad they're at least looking into it.
Yeah, I think it has helped a bit, especially against those, six-back formations, as people call it, with 4 at the back sitting back plus 2 DMs. That congestion was getting very, very frustrating. Actually, we're looking to talk a bit more about the 4-2-1-3 a bit later in the podcast, so I'll move on from this and actually move on to what they've said is coming in a future patch. It's been nice to see them doing this, although it has led to a bit of confusion about what has been patched and what hasn't been patched. People thinking that things they're saying they're going to patch or are taking a look at have already been patched is quite common at the moment. But the things that are being looked at, and I guess a patch could come quite soon, because last time they said they're working on things and then it was actually fixed, or they tried to fix it pretty quickly, so that might happen again. The stuff they're focusing on after this patch are ground pass speed, players without the ball catching up to the dribbler regardless of pace difference, keeper positioning, finesse shot playstyle balancing, AI defender interceptions, tackle backs, and assisted shooting, lace and finesse shots. That is a very, at least in my view, promising list, Richard, of things that they're looking at there.
Yeah, I think it's been a strange couple of patches, because just in general, the general flow of the game, I think if you compare October, November to now, it does feel like we're going in an upward trajectory, but it feels like we're taking really, really small steps. Like there's not been a patch that's changed wholesale the game, really, other than probably the 5-back one that adjusted the 5-back and people then stopped playing the 5. So I think we're waiting for sort of a big shake-up patch that people will generally feel like has adjusted the game in a positive manner. When all that may come, my only slight worry is that I actually don't think there's that big of a problem with the finesse shots. I think we need to be able to score from outside the box because it's quite hard to break down players if you're not launching it over the top first time. And having avenues to score from outside the box, such as power shots and Trivelas and finesse shots, I think are quite integral to being able to actually score and create chances. So I'm wary of what's going to come. The lace shot thing, surely to me, that will be the near post shots, like when you're on the byline, because those shots just go in way too consistently. Where you just like the player just roofs it into the top of the net and the goalie don't save it. But I'm intrigued more than anything.
Yeah, and actually, it's an interesting point, Ivan. Do you think that while, I don't know, I personally see that a lot of my opponents are going for finesse shots, just that's their play style, to use the term in a different sense, right? Like they are just looking for finesse shots from outside the box and, they'll green time them. Maybe they're even using assisted shooting. But in my view, at least, a game built around the finesse shot play style, both senses of the word, is not necessarily a game that feels true to what we want to play.
Whereas I do agree, I do think finesses with keeper movement, especially with double tap triangle, are easily counterable. And if the opponent is only going for finesse shots and that's their main thing, I think there's enough counters to it, whether that's manual defending, whether that's higher depth, whether that's keeper movement. And I think I'm personally also biased because I am a fan of finesse shots and like the playstyle. And also I do think they're currently fine. It's not something that I think of being something that needs fixing or tuning. And at the same time, it's a good counter to those park the bus formations, whether that's a 5-back, whether that's a formation with 2 CDMs. I think, and especially inside the box, finesse shots are also very consistent, where I think we've lacked that throughout the years at times of a consistent finish in the box every time. I think playstyles help for having this sort of consistent finishing. And you mentioned assisted shooting. I do think precision shooting is better once you're used to it. So maybe in that sense it's overpowered, but then again it's manual, right? It's manual aim pretty much. So I'm personally a fan of the way finesses work right now, especially because as long as you move the keeper with a double triangle, it's going to go in on very, very rare occasions, I think. And if it's inside the box, then it's just a consistent way of finishing.
Yeah, so I mean, it'd be worth talking about. So what is the technique you're using to stop finesses from outside the box?
Well, I think, I'm not sure if it was last year. I think it's potentially this year. Yeah, I think it was this year where they added / modified a bit the way keeper movement works with triangle and more so moving keeper to the side. So there's a mechanic where you double tap the triangle button and keeper kind of shifts towards the far post. And that's normally implemented to counter crossing, although I think it could be slightly better. But that mechanic is mostly used to move keeper quicker than you can just by holding down the right stick. Very often used for finesse shots and sometimes used for 1v1s when the opponent is coming diagonally from the side. And there's another mechanic with moving the keeper, which isn't used at all because of how kind of overpowered it is to just hold down triangle that they've added this year. It's the realistic way of a keeper coming out where they come out and they stop in front of the striker and they try to position themselves and react to the shot, right? No keeper in real life just charges at the attacker and jumps in their feet to grab the ball like in FC. And that mechanic is tap triangle once and then hold it down the second time. But so far it's not being used at all, I don't believe. I think there will be a time where it's going to be used. So it's something to keep in mind and know that it exists. because I think inevitably holding down triangle will be patched in some sort of way.
Yeah.
And the new mechanic they've added, which I was a big fan of, theoretically, will become very useful. So I think there's also, with the goalkeeper, enough tools to counter different situations, whether that be crosses, finesse shots, or 1v1s. So I don't think we need any sort of kind of nerf in finishing.
Yeah, that's interesting. So with the double tap one, because that's one that I've not really got that good at doing myself. I've heard of it, but maybe haven't practiced enough. Is that just you double tap the ball when you think they're going to be going for a finesse shot pretty soon, or
yes? So, and you'll see the keeper move much quicker than if you would, and much further than if you were holding down the right stick. And also, if you want to move your keeper back to where he came from, you just tap triangle a third time, which kind of cancels that keeper movement. And it works even better for Trivelas, I think, than finesses. But I think it works almost equally well for both. And it's probably the most effective way of dealing with finesse shots in Trivelas.
Interesting. Hugh, how do you feel about these? Because I know, although you're playing at high level, you're not competing as such. So your experience with the game is through just regular gameplay like the rest of us. Do you think that finesse shots do need to be nerfed? And do you kind of take Ivan's points on board? Like, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'd say that I think that the shots themselves don't feel that overpowered. Like in a vacuum, if you look at how the shot's being hit, like a long range finesse, it's not like ridiculously high speed or anything. You would expect like the real life equivalent to a very high rated player who specializes in finesse shots to be able to hit a shot like that. But the problem is that goalkeepers just don't know what to do with them, at least unless you're like moving them or things like that. And I think it's the same thing we saw with the long range Trivelas, that even though they in theory patch the Trivela shot, if you green time it from the right angle, it still just kind of floats in, because the issue is that the keeper doesn't know how to handle it, not that the shot itself is that good. So it feels like they're kind of more dealing with the symptom than the cause. And I assume that patching keepers as a whole is just like a little too complicated, at least to do mid-cycle, because this has kind of been an issue for a few years now, where like these really long range looping shots just kind of like float in and the keepers just kind of give up and watch them. I'm not sure if it's one of those things where they kind of want the usefulness of the far reach play style to be more apparent, where like really only the far reach play style goalkeepers like Buffon can actually save them. Kind of the same thing with like anticipate and the tackle backs, where if you don't have anticipate, it's very apparent. And because I think they kind of wanted it to be like, oh, I can really tell when I have anticipate because this doesn't happen as much. But especially with goalkeepers, like a lot of time you're just using whoever gets you chemistry. And if you kind of eliminate a large portion of keepers that don't have a certain play style, it becomes really difficult. And then, if you do use like a Buffon with far reach, then he doesn't have like the rush out that like a Courtois has. And I know that you kind of have to make changes, but it feels like goalkeepers are very siloed into like one thing or the other. And it leads to a lot of goalkeepers just feeling really useless.
That's an interesting point. And for me, one of the concerns here is really the dominance, even if it's not necessarily at the very top end, in terms of popularity of players with the Finesse Plus playstyle. I feel like we shouldn't be playing a game where Finesse Plus players just have so much more value than other, even shooting playstyles like power shot, for example. Would you say that's kind of true as well? Hugh, do you feel that there is too much of a skew towards the Finesse shot playstyle plus than anything else?
Well, I would say that basically our biggest, most popular Evo of the cycle has Finesse Plus in it, assuming you didn't have a glitched player that didn't get it. But, I think that certainly has contributed. The Pedro Neto SPC being so cheap and, prominent. I've used them myself, so I can't complain. But, I think it's just been made very easily accessible to everyone. So I'd say it is pretty common, but I think it's also just like one of those things where like the best and biggest new Evo has it. So like thus everyone's kind of going to have it. I guess in some ways it's almost nice that like they released an SBC like Jairzinho, who, although he's very good, he doesn't have finesse plus, and he's like a right-footed right winger. So, I think in past years we might be lamenting another Jairzinho SBC, but in some ways I almost think it's good because it's going to add some variety to the game, which is kind of funny to say. But hopefully, as Team of the Year evolutions and SBCs and things like that, there's some more viable options where it's not just like the clear best option is just getting a finesse plus player.
Yeah, and look, it's important to know how to counter these things. And actually, Ivan's point about moving the keeper and stuff is going to still be relevant because they're not saying anything about patching Trivelas. So we'll see, whether shots from distance are still effective because of that. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens and what the full detail of the patch is when it comes. For now, though, we'll take a break and we'll move on to what I'm hearing is Ivan's favorite topic, IQ. Right after this. Hello, welcome back after the break. And yeah, I was chatting to Ivan ahead of this podcast and he said to me, even though we've talked about it quite a bit recently, that we need to talk about IQ/tactics because it's one of his favorite topics. So, why is it one of your favorite topics, Ivan? We'll start with that.
Well, despite, I think, some positions having flaws, like, as you mentioned, shadow striker and other roles that you might not feel are fully working as intended, I do think this year we have a lot more options than we have previously, whether that's tactics or formations. We have had years where you could play a bit more with like depth and with a width and attack and defense and your third and your opponent's third. But generally, I like a lot the new roles and the new focuses and the fact that there's no FC24 and previous 4-3-2-1 anymore. Mm-hmm. So you can actually play more than one formation, even though we have one kind of creeping in as a new meta. But generally, I think this is the year I've seen the most variety in terms of formations. Pre and post 5 at the back patch. That's something I enjoy, and I think every formation has a weak point, has a strong point, has patterns. You can play, 2 players can play the exact same formation in completely different ways because of roles and focuses. So that's something I really enjoy because it's kind of a nerd, a football purist, if you like, and you can kind of do that in FC this year. And there's nothing that seems particularly overpowered bar a couple of roles and positions potentially.
Yeah, it's an interesting one actually because Ivan, you're someone who I think was very much known as a pro player for knowing all the mechanics and exploiting them when you needed to. But certainly I've got to know you as someone who, is very much into the footballing side of FC or FIFA and does want to play football. So I'd be interested to know, in terms of the, I guess, internal conflict that causes between wanting to be a bit of a football purist, but also wanting to make sure you're winning and needing to use certain mechanics at pro level. How do you kind of deal with that? What's your approach?
Hey, I hold my hands up. I'm the first one to admit I loved doing glitches when I used to play. I loved scoring kickoff glitch crosses. I love scoring first-time volleys, finesses, tornadoes, whatever it is. There's something just fun about it from the game aspect of just having fun, scoring a goal, having your opponent take 5 seconds to take kickoff, and you just picturing how annoyed he is. It's just something that it just brings out something in you. But just football wise, from the football perspective, I also always loved scoring these real nice plays, whether that's first touch, whether that's some sort of like combination that outplay your opponent. For example, one thing I really love this year and last year that I don't think we've mentioned is precision passing. I know precision shooting in competitive play is mandatory, but precision passing is probably my favorite feature in this game. It's very, I think, underrated. I love doing it. It allows you to do tiki-taka with all players, whereas a lot of people complain, I don't have the play style, so I cannot play a first-time pass to a player that's 4 yards next to me. Whereas you actually can, but it just takes a bit of practice, a bit of timing, a bit of mechanics. So now that I'm a coach, I actually prefer seeing my players not abuse mechanics, right? Because I think that is somewhat of a shortcut towards short-term success. Whereas if you learn to play properly, if you learn the basics, if you learn how to attack, how to defend, how to play specific formations, if you're tactically more astute, I think that will help you in the long run. And whenever we face a player that abuses mechanics only, and it works, it does kind of make me sad, because I'm thinking, okay, he's beating us now, but he's not going to beat us in 3 months, but by then he'll figure out something else, and I'm just getting annoyed at it, right? Whereas I tell my player, you can, but I don't think it makes sense. If you learn to do it the other way, long-term success. So I do think this is probably the year where, with a couple of exceptions, we don't have any exploits, or like, except the first time through balls that it's not like they've not tried to fix them. We don't have that many exploits to be abused. And so unless it's a 4-2-1-3, as you previously mentioned, and we'll talk about it, I think generally it's kind of patterns. At the end of the day, it's a game, it's code. But it's also, if you have some tactical awareness and some football IQ, so to say, I think you can put yourself in a much better position than your opponent.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Would you say that kind of reflects your experience of watching competitive play, Richard? I know there is a big variety in terms of the tactics. I mean, it seems like a different formation wins FC Pro every week, which is something that I don't think we've really seen before, or at least, you might see different ones each week, but maybe it's alternating between a few, or it's been impacted by a recent patch where things have just changed to one particular formation. So I guess that has been a positive from that perspective. And I guess the point about maybe focusing on more kind of football purist play and not abusing mechanics, it feels like maybe that's got better with the patches as well over time.
I'll take the second point first. I think if you're a pro player, you do whatever you need to do, just as NightWatch was saying, like to win. And you'll build your team around that, whether it's finesse shots or Trivelas, or as it used to be before, like with the corners, like hitting power shots to get corners and then score corners. So I think we are at the pro level, like, yes, people will play a certain way to sort of, they'll have a style, but if an opportunity arises where you are going to do something, quote unquote, exploiting the game, you're going to take it because you're playing for large amounts of money. I think the thing regarding tactics and roles, and I'm sure Ivan was watching, at the end of every show, we give away the tactics for all the 5 players. And I got the chance, we get to speak to 2 players after the tournament has finished their particular week on the Pro Open. And I spoke to 𝘬𝘯𝘰 about his tactics. And he was sort of talking, and he wasn't really saying too much. He'd finished second in the group, so he was a little bit disappointed, but he still went through. And I asked him, why have you only got 4 players on player role ++? Like, there was opportunity to put more players on roles ++, but he didn't do it. And I think a lot of the pro players don't really, they obviously know about roles ++, but they don't necessarily know what they want to play yet. And I think the 4-2-3-1, obviously, in more casual play, has dominated a lot of games. But I think at the pro level, there's still quite a lot of tinkering, which usually in a calendar year, like by January, pros have more or less figured out what they want to play, unless we get a player that comes in and changes the game completely, like 𝘵𝘵𝘃𝗀𝘀 did last year and Erling Haaland. So I do think it's quite interesting, like, regarding tactics and roles and IQ, there's still a long way to go for a lot of, especially at the top level of like competitive play. Because then Stingray got the chance to speak afterwards as well, who won 5 games out of 5, and said, yeah, roles are super important. I've got to make sure as many players as possible on role ++. And you've got 2 players who are arguably 2 of the best top 10 in the world, who very, very different opinions on the tactics and instructions and roles. I think it's quite interesting.
Yeah, it just goes to show there's so much experimenting to be done, I guess, combinations to find. And actually, I want to come back to you, Ivan. I mean, people might be saying, I want to know more about precision passing. We'll come back to that because that's interesting. But has there been a particular combination of roles that you found to be useful and effective so far?
In terms of competitive play, I think there's there's different ways. I think what maybe 95% of the pros play is advanced forward on the strikers, inside forward on the wings. And then the rest is kind of depends on the formation. Even only those two, I don't fully agree that that's the meta. However, even in other positions, you have roles that are not necessarily used, but can be used in pro play if you play according to those roles. So, for example, I don't think in pro play, maybe with the odd exception here and there, but nothing that stood out, nobody plays false back on a wing back, right? Nobody really plays ball playing defender on a center back. Whereas the latter makes sense because I think counters can be deadly on this game, let alone what are your center back out of position. I think there is a world where false back is usable as kind of a niche meta, and something is underpowered and not good enough until somebody uses it and it becomes a new meta, right? Somebody has to discover it and find a way to play it. And I do think there are some instructions, some roles, and some focuses that are part of this, whether that's false back on a fullback in combination with wide half on a CDM. So they kind of swap roles offensively and defensively. There's a world where you have specific items in your team where you want your CDM to only defend, but you want them on as a fullback in attack. So you can always play around with various fun stuff. However, pro play and fun doesn't always go hand in hand. But I think there is a world where people discover something new, and because they're the first one to discover it in an important tournament, it will get them far.
Yeah, that is really interesting, and I think it just demonstrates to everyone, I guess, that you should keep experimenting with roles and tactics, and you never know when you're going to kind of stumble upon something that really is kind of game changing, I guess. There are a lot of people out there not really stumbling upon anything because they're just playing the 4-2-1-3, which has become increasingly common. I don't think it's like the most played formation or anything, but I know people notice it because it is very, very defensively solid. I was just wondering whether yourself, Ivan, you could explain what makes the 4-2-1-3 so awkward to play against.
I think it's pretty straightforward with the wingers just staying forward, ready to counter, which in itself is not a bad thing because throughout the years we've always had the meta where people just send their fullback on a run and it's impossible to exploit that kind of gap left in defense. So from that point of view, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think the bigger negative are the two CDMs in front of the back four that kind of close down the middle very well, which combined with a potential 70 depth, you can't really do much through the middle. First time through balls, which would be a logical counter to that, are also not that easy to do because of the two CDMs in the middle of the pitch. And then at the same time, especially with playstyles and playstyle pluses and better items with better stats, once you recover the ball, just holding down 4 bars of triangle down the wing gets you pretty much a 3v3, a 4v4, even sometimes a 4v3 on the counter. So I think it's been years where counters in the game are more effective than building up and breaking someone down, which is kind of the opposite to real life in a way, or at least you don't get punished as much for defending for a large period of time, whether that's more gaps opening up, whether that's more stamina being drained, because in real life, one of the hardest things to do is just keep a compact team with no gaps, with no mistakes. So yeah, I think the main reason it's so effective is obviously how easy it is to counter with that formation, especially if you're not diligent against it and you don't have the patience to try to find the space and the gaps. You're bound to lose the ball in the middle against the CDMs or the center backs and just get countered all the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Hugh, I know you like to do things to counter meta tactics or approaches. Is there anything you found has worked for playing against the 4-2-1-3?
Yeah, I've actually been using a 4-3-3 flat that's been really effective for me. And the reason I think it's so effective is, I guess there's a few reasons. One is because it's a flat three in midfield, I think the players are more willing to alternate with each other where necessary. So if I pull one player out of position, the others can kind of reassign. And I think the game's more willing to do that because they're all technically playing the same position. Whereas I think if you have like a 4-3-3-2, it kind of feels like the CDM is the CDM. And if you pull the CDM way out of position, the center mid's not really going to cover that space. But I have the center mid as a holding on defend with intercept plus. It's the 𝘵𝗱𝗰𝗀𝘀. So he kind of sits right in front of the opponent's cam. So when they're trying to pass into him, he's just sitting right there. But then also in possession, because the cam tends to stay forward in the 4-2-1-3, that he's available as a passing option because he's right in front of the cam again. So like he kind of is the best of both worlds defensively and in attack, and I can just manually use him to pull him further back if necessary. And I also use the striker as an advanced forward on support. So in defense, the striker drops a little deeper. So it's almost like I'm defending in like a 4-3-1-2, but the strikers are out wide, like ready for the counter. So I'm kind of man-to-man in midfield, but then when the striker drops back, he can apply a bit more pressure to the CDMs as well. So for that reason, I found it really effective. I'm also using both fullbacks on false back. So they can contribute in attack, but they're also in position kind of like on the diagonal lines between their midfield and their wingers, that they can kind of sit in that space and recover. Sometimes they can get beaten behind, like with the early through ball over the top, but I have fast enough center backs that can help to like get out and cover the wings. So I found it really effective.
Interesting. And one thing I found quite good against the 4-2-1-3 is using winger on the left wing and right wing and really focusing all your play in that area, because of course their wide players, the right wing and left wing, are not going to track back. So you should be able to overload them in those wide spaces. And actually, I can see why the three in midfield would help with that too, because those players are likely to float out wide and then help overload the fullbacks. And as kind of cynical as it sounds, I mean, it's part of real football. I think cutbacks are pretty good because you kind of want to go around the defensive midfielders as much as possible. And yeah, as I was saying, I think the role winger on your wide players will help quite a bit with that, because it just keeps the players out wide, but also they will still come inside. I think winger is quite an underrated role. We talked about this on the last gameplay podcast. They'll still come inside a bit and they'll still contribute a little bit more centrally, but they keep things nice and kind of spread out, which is what you want against that formation, which can, be quite limited actually going forward. If they haven't got the counter-attacking opportunity, it should be easy to defend them. So I think if you think about it a bit more like that, that might help kind of the mentality playing against it. Maybe Hugh, we could pop the tactics code for that 433 in the description. So yeah, look out for that, listeners. And Ivan, anything to add in terms of playing against the 4-2-1-3 before we move on?
I think more than anything, if you yourself are not playing the 4-2-1-3 and just have a counter end-to-end game one against each other, I think more than anything, you just have to be kind of more diligent and patient with the ball, because otherwise you're just going to fall into the trap of playing exactly how your opponent wants, because they just want to sit back and counter every time they get the ball. Even if they get the ball in midfield, still the same thing, an easy through ball and they're in. So you just have to be more patient, more diligent, kind of tell them, if you're going to play that formation, you're just not going to see the ball, mate. Just keep chasing.
Yeah, that is really true, because they're not going to be able to apply pressure further up the pitch at all. So the other thing I was going to say actually is I think it's a big mistake when you're playing against that tactic. And actually, I think left wing and right wing, generally, when you're playing against those positions, to have your fullbacks on fullback defend, at least I find that they just stand off the winger too much, and then you end up making it really easy for them to pass the ball from defense directly to their attacking wide players, and that can cause really easy counter-attacking opportunities. So I guess your point, Hugh, about false back would help with that because they're further forward, and also it'd be even better, just to play the regular fullback role without the defend focus, that seems to do the job perfectly fine. So there's no need to kind of overdo it, I guess, defensively. And also having those fullbacks involved in the attack somewhat is pretty helpful, because obviously there should be 3 men in there, or women, of course. So yeah, I think that's something worth considering. Right. I think we'll take a break there and come back with a couple more gameplay tips before we finish off. Hello, a quick reminder in this break to both listeners and supporters. There is a supporter Discord for gold or icon supporters of the podcast, and in there you'll find a whole section where you can arrange rush matches and get some good teammates to make progress. And there is a champs channel for commiserating about champs generally or getting a bit of advice. And there's the 𝘭𝑪𝑑vice channel, which is specifically for all Ultimate Team advice. There's plenty of other resources in there too, and a fantastic community. So if you haven't signed up already, then do sign up, become a supporter on the gold or icon tiers, and you'll get the bonus podcast that you get on the bonus podcast tier, plus access to the Discord too. It would be great to have you in there. Just search Support for Weekly and you can find the options for signing up over on Patreon. A huge thank you if you decide to do so, and a huge thank you, of course, to all those supporters keeping the podcast going. And let's jump back into this week's pod. Hello, welcome back after the break. Now, I said I'd come back to it. Ivan, you alluded to the fact you're using precision passing. It's not something we've talked about that much on the podcast, but almost all of us converts to precision shooting. So yeah, what are you finding works well with precision passing? What are the kind of contexts you're using it in? And I guess I should say the buttons, for those who perhaps don't know, you can do the lobbed precision pass or the ground precision pass. The lobbed precision pass would be on Xbox, RB, and then X, or on PlayStation, R1 and then square. Or if you want to do the ground precision pass, it would be R1 and then triangle on PlayStation, or RB and then Y on Xbox. And so with that in mind, Ivan, what would you, I guess, say are the situations you're using it in, and how are you using it?
I'll go the other way around and say when I'm not using it, and probably the only players in my team I'm not using precision passing with are my strikers. I use precision passing, I think in pro play, it's become more of an occurrence to use precision passing with your goalkeeper to kind of get out of trouble, because sometimes players are positioned in a way where if you give a ground pass or a through ball, a cross is maybe not what you want to do. It's going to get assisted in a way where it's going to get intercepted. So precision pass with the goalkeeper has kind of become kind of a meta at the high end.
Are you talking precision lobbed pass in that situation?
Both. Like,
okay.
For example, you're with the goalkeeper and you want to get rid of the ball to your fullback, but if you play a driven pass, the winger or the striker is just going to step in and intercept it. So ideally, you want to play a kind of a driven pass, or like a quick pass a couple yards behind your defender, so he can get the ball in empty space and then either turn or clear it themselves, or whatever you want to do, less of a risk. So that's what players at the pro level have been doing. Myself, I've been using precision pass last year as well as this year. There's different, patterns and plays against different formations. One of the parts I love about like the 𝘵𝑐𝗱𝗰𝗀𝘀 thing. Whether that's on the wing, whether that's through the middle, whether that's sometimes a precision lobbed pass where you play some balls in behind. It is effective. It's just not, I don't think, more effective, or at least not worth it compared to lob through balls at the moment. However, it's something that has the potential to become meta and become, in a way, also overpowered. However, I'm not sure I mind that yet, because at the end of the day, it is manual. So if you have the accuracy and the nerves and the composure to do it, then fair enough. You're good enough with it, and you're good enough with that mechanic.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess what I should ask maybe is, what's a good way of kind of starting to use it if you're not particularly used to it? Are there areas where you think actually this is where someone could kind of add it into their game just in a small way, just to kind of get used to doing it?
I think the main way of thinking with precision passing is you want to use it when there's no other pass in the game which will do what precision passing can do. So, for example, what I said previously with the goalkeeper, you want to pass to your fullback on the ground, but you know it's going to get intercepted if you driven pass it. So you just play a precision pass a few yards behind him, and he's going to collect the ball without it getting intercepted. You want to play a ball down the line, but you know that if you play a through ball, the game will kind of overpower the through ball, and the defender will get to it first. And if you give an X pass, a midfielder, for example, will intercept it, or his opposing winger. So in that case, you want to precision pass down the line, and your player will get to the ball first, not the defender. But at the same time, it's far enough from the player right in front of your ball holder, and they won't be able to intercept it. So there's the way I think about it is, can I do this pass with the assisted passing in game? No. Then I should try precision passing, and more often than not, you have a solution.
Yeah, nice. It's funny. It's something I've done every now and again, but maybe needed the confidence of Dr. Nightwatch to actually commit to doing it more. So I'll try it out a bit more and start using it in more situations, I think. Let's move on to actually something you mentioned briefly, I think, earlier, Richard, about the aerial meta. There was that patch not too long ago, which basically means that it feels like headers are really, really poor. Players might connect with them, but they just don't really seem to have any chance of actually being effective. Do you think there is some kind of viability in aerial play at all? Because some people are saying, Richard, that it's completely done for, basically, and there's no point in trying to score from headers, basically.
No, I without doubt think we'll get back to aerial plus. We just need the players in game to facilitate that play style. Because a lot of the time, especially when you are chipping the ball into the back post or you're looking for knockdowns, you're never looking to score. You're looking to get the second ball. And with the contested headers as they are, if you have a 6'4" Haaland with aerial plus against a 6'4" Van Dijk with aerial plus, the ball's just going to go loose. No one's going to win that header as it should, like, in my opinion. So it's just going to be, everyone's going to play then on the second ball and on the second bounce. And I think EA have been very, very cautious on not releasing really, really good aerial plus players because they saw what happened last year. And for, I would probably say between like February, March, April, when we had that Solo, I think it was, and Courtois, the striker, the game was somewhat unplayable, especially at the pro level. I think we will end up there because I also think it's the easiest way of getting to a very, very, very competitive level and playing. Like, it's the quickest shortcut. And if people can do that and it becomes effective, it will get used.
Yeah, I wonder, though, whether, this was for contested headers, if that will ever be the same as it was, because you look at it now, you've still got Van Dijk with aerial plus, he's got power header, he's got good jumping, heading accuracy, and yet if that header is contested, if it's a corner, for example, it doesn't feel like he's ever able to get, well, not ever, it still happens, but it just feels way less consistent, his ability to, get his head on the ball and head it into the net. Do you think that sort of thing might be out of the question, not out of the question, but just much less likely to be a meta, whereas perhaps, I guess, knockdown headers in open play, that's kind of different, I guess.
Yeah, I think corners, you've got less control over where the ball's going to go. So even when if you play the short corner, then recycle back into the box at the back post, like, people have been scoring goals that way. And it's just all about if you can get a mismatch or you can get an aerial plus player against someone else. I don't know if you've got him, but if anyone's listening, they've got 𝘬𝘯𝘰𝗍𝘀, the FC Pro Live item. If you just put him at striker and you just chip balls into him with square, he will win almost everything, and you can just knock it down and play off him. And he doesn't have aerial plus. He's just a big lump. As soon as we get good aerial plus players who can actually play as well with the ball at the feet, I think the game will drastically take a change.
Yeah, that does make sense. Ivan, any thoughts on sort of the aerial side of things, heading, crossing, all that sort of stuff? I know we had an Evo recently which gave 𝗬𝗃+, and I don't know, people don't really talk about that like they did last year. 𝗬𝗃+ used to be massive.
I do agree with what Richard said. I think knockdowns are potentially an issue. However, we're thankfully not there yet. I also think the lack of 4-3-2-1 from previous years is also going to help a bit in a way, because last year it was easy to put any player at left forward, right forward, have them be back post in the box, there for the knockdown. Whereas this year, you have that with a cam. So for starters, they're not in that right position. But it's potentially doable with a two-striker formation, but I think without a 4-3-2-1 and without that many aerial items, so you will not necessarily have a Haaland at cam with aerial plus or Haaland at left mid with aerial plus. And even then, even if you do, they won't be as well positioned as previous years. I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue. It is still going to be a niche meta, but not that big of an issue as previous years. And in terms of contested headers, I know a lot of people complain that corners are very ineffective. Selfishly, from a competitive point of view, I would rather this extreme than the other. But I can see how for more casual players or even just not pro players, it is annoying. But unfortunately, if there's no way to balance it, I personally would rather this than the opposite.
Nice. That makes sense. Just one final thing. Ivan, I thought I'd give you the opportunity because I feel like you often have something up your sleeve. Is there any particular just quick thing you'd recommend to listeners that you've picked up across this cycle from a gameplay perspective?
I think we've talked about it enough, but precision passing could be, and precision shooting. I think those are the two game changers. I think EA are doing a good job gameplay-wise to reward more manual play, at least offensively. Defensively, I'm not sure how easy that is to balance, but offensively with these two mechanics, I think they're both game changers. And they're fairly, I wouldn't say easy to do, but you get help with the arrow and precision shooting and with the visuals on precision passing. So it's something that people can definitely try, pick up on, and it will bring you, I would say, new joy to gameplay because it does feel more rewarding and you do it yourself. It's kind of like when you cook your own meal. It just tastes better compared to when you buy it from the shop. So same thing. When you give a pass and you end up scoring a goal off a precision pass, it feels much better than if you just hold through ball and just pray the game does it for you.
Yeah, let them cook, I guess, as they say, right?
Exactly.
We've talked about precision shooting for a long time on this podcast, but it has been interesting more recently to see some creators pick up on it as being a great thing and people enjoying using it, not just finding it more effective. Maybe we'll come back to that in the near future. As always, any questions people might have on anything on this podcast, precision shooting, precision passing, anything, then do send them in via all the different ways you can do so. So in the Pod Priority Questions channel, in the supporter Discord, or via email 𝗏𝗏weekly@mail.com. You can tweet at 𝗏weeklypod, and yeah, that will get to us and we will definitely incorporate it into the podcast. So thank you very much, Ivan, Dr. Nightwatch, for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate your insights today.
Thanks for having me, and hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, definitely. Be great to have you back on soon. And a big thank you to, of course, to 𝗏𝗏bear. It's been great to have you on this pod.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Been good to talk gameplay. If anyone's interested in the tactics I was talking about, I did put them in the Discord tactic bank. So if you're not in the Discord, definitely join that. You can see the full walkthrough there. I think we can probably put the code for the tactics somewhere in the pod description as well. But definitely reach out if you have questions.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Yeah, Hugh's in the supporter Discord, very much active. And if you are a gold or above supporter, do jump in to the supporter Discord. And finally, thank you very much to Richard Buckley. It's been great to have you on this podcast.
Thank you very much. You can find me on all social media at 𝗏𝗏buckley98 and on the FC Pro Live streams every Monday, and then the final coming up on the 1st of February.
Yeah, nice. Good reminder. And thank you very much, of course, to all your listeners tuning in. A reminder that you can subscribe to this podcast via all the different podcast platforms. So that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from. You can also catch it on YouTube if you are watching/listening over there, then do drop a like, leave a comment. It definitely does help out. And of course, we read all of them. You can also subscribe there, which is always good. And if you would like an extra podcast every single week, including this week's content episode, which is a supporter exclusive, then you can become a supporter. It's just £3 a month for double the podcast content. Just search Support for Weekly or follow the link in the description of this podcast. If you are a supporter, then a huge thank you for supporting the pod and keeping it going. And a big thank you too to those icon patrons: Dave B, Hugh J, Jeff B, Darren W, Warren A, Stephen M, Waterman, Dan W, Roger D, Rob P, Lee A, Dom P, L M, Damon H, The Shirt Locker, Alex M, Tom B, Jake S, Neil P, Michael K, David G, Andrew R, Michael H, Jimmy K, Brendan T, 𝗵𝘀𝗀𝗸𝘀, Michael B, Brian V, Josh R, Brent P, Rob W, and Juicy. Plus a special thanks to Luke M, Dave B, Hugh J, Tom M, Darren W, and Pato Foot for advice and production assistance. Before I leave you, just one more thing to add though. Ultimate Team is a bit like life really. It has its many ups and downs. If you're having a few more downs than ups in real life in these more difficult times, then please don't feel that you're alone or need to struggle on without taking action. If you go to thecalmzone.net, there's loads of resources, advice, support, or even just a friendly chat for anyone who needs it. If it sounds like it could help you, then head over to thecalmzone.net. And for now, have a good one, and I'll catch you on the next podcast.